In this video, we're looking at the highly anticipated LZX Topogram. The Topogram is a linear sequential key generator. In layman's terms, what that means is it takes an incoming signal and splits it up into a number of discrete keys, which can all be accessed via their own outputs. Topogram fills a number of needs within the context of a larger LZX system, with a huge number of distinct outputs. The possibilities for modulation and advanced image composition are virtually endless. Topogram also represents the first release of the third generation of LZX modules, which feature increased fidelity and quality throughout. So let's take a look at one of the most basic uses of Topogram. So I'm going to start by taking a very simple circle ramp out of my visual cortex, plugging that into the source on my Topogram, and I'm going to take this middle output and plug that so we can view it on the monitor. There we go. So immediately you'll see the Topogram creating a circular key. I can adjust my lower limit and my upper limit. I can adjust my gain, which goes from very, very soft to fairly hard. And of course I have voltage control over these three. Topogram also has a through output, which is an exact multiple of what's coming into the input. This can be very useful in a number of patching scenarios. And then of course on the bottom we have 14 separate key outputs. So if we quickly start to go through these, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. These represent 5 separate bands of window keys. So essentially, Topogram is looking at your upper threshold and your lower threshold and dividing that into 5 separate slices. You also have the inverted versions of each of these keys available. So if we look at the bottom -5 versus the +5, you'll see the difference there. And in this middle row, we also have 4 combinations. So this is taking the minimum of 1 and 2. So this is essentially showing us a band that represents that difference between the first key and the second key. And so on throughout. And if we adjust the gain on this, we're going to get softer or harder keys. These 4 outputs, when combined with the +1 and the -5, will split your image into 6 completely discrete bands. So let's take a look at that now. For this example, I'm going to use 2 color chords as they provide me with 6 controllable channels of color information. This will help to efficiently demonstrate the possibilities of Topogram. So now I'll start patching my +1 output, and then all 4 of my min combination outputs. As you can see, I'm doing this in order. This is just going to make this result very clean. And I have my color codes set to the different colors of the rainbow. So red, orange, green, cyan, blue, and purple. So immediately you can see the effect that I'm getting. And if I get these settings just right on my 2 thresholds, I should see 6 fairly equally spaced different color bands. So you can see the image going from red to yellow to green to cyan to blue to purple. If I increase the opacity on each of these channels, we should start to get a little more distinction between those bands. Now of course we can adjust the gain, so they'll start to smush together a little bit more and get more or less distinction between them. We can also voltage control the gain. And one neat trick for this is you could take the through output, which is going to take that original circle gradient, and plug that straight into the gain VC. So then we have a key that gets harder and harder as it gets to the center of the circle. And of course we can modify this in different ways. There we go. So we could just have a very subtle effect there. We can also add modulation to the upper and lower voltage controls. So I'll go into my lower VC with a pendulum, and this will start to move my shape around. You'll see that the 5th band is not affected by the lower voltage control. Similarly, the number 1 band will not be affected by the upper. So I'm going to take another LFO, go into that one. And of course, these upper and lower VC controls are not limited by low frequency signals. I'm going to go into a prismatic array. And we could set this all the way up to vertical video rates. And start to get some animation. And there you go. So that's a simple rundown of the basic features on Topogram. If I switch through different sources, different ramp shapes in this case, you can see some of the different results I'm capable of getting. Could also switch to something completely different, like a diver. The quality of Topogram's image processing is extremely high, which can create some very fine results. Topogram is also capable of processing slower modulation rate signals. We'll look at that in the next patch. So now that we've gotten a taste of what the various outputs of Topogram can do with an image source, let's see how it works with an LFO or other modulation rate source. As you can see, I've already patched my diver into a fairly standard navigator shape changer configuration. I've taken the gradient output from shape changer and plugged that into a staircase to further emphasize the results, just to give us something of a more complex image to look at. This part of the patch doesn't really matter for this example. All you need to use Topogram in this context is some sort of patch with a lot of different voltage control inputs. So in this case, I have a ton of things I can voltage control on the staircase, navigator, shape changer, and diver. If you have something like a memory palace, these 14 outputs are going to be great to plug into there as well. And really, the same basic principle will apply to any sort of LZX patch you might have. So to start, I'm going to take one of my LFOs, plug it into the source input on Topogram, and let's just quickly take a look at some of the different outputs. So I'm going to take this directly into my visual cortex for now. So as you can see, we're not seeing a whole lot. As I adjust the gain, we should start to see a brighter image. We'll also see less of a fade in between the on and off times of the LFO. So it starts to clamp the waveform as well as amplify it. If we look at some of the different outputs, you'll start to see that they're different multiples of that same frequency. What this means in practice is that we now have 14 interrelated LFOs. So we have a variety of slower and faster waveforms. The shape is also going to be slightly different as well. You'll also notice if you play with the upper and lower thresholds, that you do start to see a difference in the waveform. It's a super flexible and easy way to generate a whole bunch of modulation sources from just one. We can get even a little bit more intricate if we start using a secondary LFO to modulate, in this case, the gain. So this should give us a very nice mix of modulation sources to control this fairly simple patch. So let's begin by taking some of these outputs and just patching them to different destinations. So I'm going to take the +1 output, put it into the rotation voltage control, and as I turn the voltage control up, we should start to see some of that LFO action happening. I'm going to keep that gain down. You can see those sharper movements are fairly indicative of a higher gain setting. And I'm going to make sure my upper and lower are set to their default values. There we go. And as I increase the gain, decrease the gain, you'll start to see some different results. So let's take a couple other outputs. Let's take the -2, put that into, say, our X voltage control on Navigator, then turn that up. We should start to see a little bit of a result there. Great. And let's take another one for the Y voltage control and start to add some in there. Yeah, that's nice. I'm going to set these up pretty fast, just so we can see a little more dynamic result. There we go. So now you can see we're adjusting the X voltage control, rotation voltage control, and Y voltage control. And even though we're using the same LFO to control them all, we're getting different results in every dimension. Let's try some of the min outputs. I'll take the min 1, 2. And I'm going to go into the wave input on my diver. This should have a pretty dramatic effect, as you can see. So now it's starting to get a little bit more square. We could try some different outputs for this. We go to the 5. Min 4, 5. That one's pretty nice. Negative 3. Oh, that might be the winner. Let's try something into the vertical phase of diver as well. Let's try negative 5 instead. 4. Feels good and bouncy. I'll take another one of these min outputs, and let's start to modulate the shape changer. So I'll put that into the ratio voltage control. Start to add a little bit of that. Sorry, subtract a little bit of that. Very cool. And finally, let's go into the curve voltage control. Great. So now I'll slow down my master LFO, and all of these modulations are going to slow down with it. And of course, I still have plenty more outputs to work with. In addition, I could take another modulation source and go into the upper or lower voltage controls here. So I'm setting my prismatic ray to a low LFO. Let me set it pretty fast actually, just so we can start to see what it's actually doing. There we go. So you can see that kind of ripple effect that's going all the way through it. If I turn this up really high, we'll start to get some pretty serious ripples. I'm going to go down to an LFO speed for this. And so that adds just another level to our modulation here. And I could take yet another output, start to modulate things on my staircase. And then once I have all my modulation set up, I can start playing with different parts of my patch. I could try turning some mirroring on my navigator. So as you can see, Topogram is capable of taking a single modulation input, or in this case a few, and splitting them into 14 different related but different bands of modulation. Even in a simple 4-module patch like this, there's plenty of modulation sources that can take advantage of this. Furthermore, interrelated modulation is a great way to add a sort of organic connectedness to an entire patch. So that should give you some idea of how to get started using your Topogram as an advanced modulation source. In the next patch, we'll look at one of the most unique and exciting possibilities of the Topogram. So in this final patch, we'll look at what might be the most anticipated feature of Topogram. For me, this was one of the specific possibilities I was most excited about. This is its ability to process an external video and split it into 6 distinct color bands, which can then be used to create a complex colorizer. So let me start by just showing you our external video. This is playing off an Andor 1 media player. So the first thing I'm going to do is take that external video, and I'm going to go directly into the source on my Topogram. You'll notice I already have my color chords patched together. This is forming a 6-channel color mixer. And again, I have these set to red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. So now I'll take the 6 distinct bands from Topogram This is easy to remember because it goes in a pattern from 1 down to these 4, and then over to 5. You can obviously use any of these outputs you want, but these 6, when patched in this order, give you 6 completely distinct bands of information. So immediately, what you see is an extremely detailed, very high fidelity 6-band colorization of the image. By adjusting my upper and lower thresholds, I can increase or decrease the dynamic range of the image. I'll usually try to get these so that the brightest parts of my image are just poking red, and the darkest parts are just turning purple. So here you can see all 6 of our colors represented in the image. I also have opacity turned all the way up on the color chords. This is going to give me a more distinct keyed effect. If I turn opacity all the way down, we'll get something a little bit softer. And of course, on the topogram itself, I have the gain turned all the way up, which is giving me very hard edges. As I bring that down, it'll start to smear the image more. Now in this case, as I bring the softness down, it's going to just get whiter and whiter, because the color chords is an additive mixer. If I start to bring the opacities back up, we should get a little bit more of a distinct effect in these softer images. And of course, I can also mix these colors any way I wish. So if I want something a little bit less prismatic, I could start to bring in some different ranges. I think I'll go back to make my yellow the brightest, then red, then we'll go to green, cyan, blue, and purple. Just makes it easy to see for this example. So from here, there are a number of different ways we could start to modify this. I'm going to take an H plus V ramp. This is in the shape of a circle. I'm going to apply this to the gain voltage control. Now what this is going to let me do is start to kind of vignette the image. So it's softening more around the edges of the frame. Again, this is going to give me a different look if I turn all these opacities down. I could also go in the opposite direction. And I'll pull these all back up. You could also go half and half on some of these. And I could also use this to VC the upper or lower controls. Turn the gain back up. And so this is going to give me some different color modulations as we progress from the center of the image towards the edge. And of course we could modulate this ramp, or we could also use a different source like a prismatic ray. All right, but I'll go back to that for now. We'll plug it back into my gain voltage control, get this dynamic range back to where I want it. Of course, I can also take each of these 6 frequency bands and apply different modulation and processing to them before hitting the color chords. So in this case, I'm just using some basic wave shaping from the navigator. And I could do this with a few different sources. So as you can see, Topogram can form the heart of an extremely sophisticated 6-band colorizer. Since you have the ability to patch out basically anywhere in between the signal path, the colorization options are virtually infinite. The Topogram's image fidelity is next level for an LZX module. The detail and quality of the keys is exceptional, providing extraordinary image results. So hopefully this video gives you a good idea of how to get started and what the Topogram is capable of. As always, please leave any questions or ideas for future videos in the comments below. Thanks for watching.